Oil prices are back on the rise, reaching $110 a barrel this week and threatening to keep prices of ordinary goods and even services high. The latest figures show that price increases for energy, groceries, and consumer products in many parts of the world are barely backing down, due in part to the higher transportation costs created by expensive oil. As if all that weren't bad enough, Russia's actions in Ukraine have the potential to make things worse. The EU and G7 formally committing themselves this week to phasing out Russian oil. But a rapid embargo of Russian oil would potentially send prices further up at a time when ordinary families are already feeling the pinch. Just take a listen to some of the comments we heard at a gas station here in Berlin.
What can you say about it? The prices are crazy. And I don't believe that this just has to do with the war in Ukraine or something like that. They're just trying to make money.
It's just crazy. There's never been anything like this before. I've been in Germany for 30 years and have never paid prices like this.
It's really extreme. It's not so bad for me because I drive a small scooter. But I basically just leave my car at home. I bought my scooter extra because of this to get around the city. If they don't want to lower the gas prices, then they should lower the value-added tax. That's what I think. How can a normal person afford to drive a car? It's becoming a luxury.
All right, some voices there from a gas station here in Berlin, and here in studio with me is my colleague, DW Business, Cassandra Sunt. Cassandra, welcome. Why does oil have such an outsized influence on living costs beyond just gasoline?
If any part of your supply chain involves a combustion engine or plastic, oil is directly connected to it. On top of that, a lot of economies right now are coming out of the pandemic. If you look at the price of oil, there is a pretty nice correlation between when vaccines started to roll out, economies started to reopen, and oil started to increase. Well, that really accelerated in the last 6 months or so, the third or fourth quarter of 2021, but it's accelerating even more. So there was already an increase in demand for oil-based products, including gasoline. And then the invasion of Ukraine happened. The West slapped a bunch of sanctions on Russia, and we're at this point now where demand is going up, but supply is starting to shrink. And anyone with even, a surface-level understanding of economics knows that that means higher prices.
Then should we assume that the oil sanctions that are now being announced on Russia, due to come into full effect at the end of this year, will that make prices go up even higher?
The signs right now are a little bit mixed, but as I'm reading it, it seems fairly probable. We've gotten some mixed messages so far. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen tried to signal that this 6-month ramp that they've got until the crude oil embargo begins, that would give people time, the different nations and their partners, to find some alternative routes. But the German economy minister was not so optimistic. He said that there could be a shock. There's a possibility of supply shortages coming, and that there could be, frankly, a real impact. Also, German industry trade group BDI told Bloomberg that replacing Russian oil, that's not easy. You can't just switch the tracks, so to speak. There's logistics involved, and that would increase cost, and that they expect prices are going to increase as well. So the question here is, how quick can these different countries get their backup plans in place? If they do that over the course of the 6 months, there could be less of an impact, a more muted impact, but if they can't get their ducks in a row in time, there could be a bigger impact. And China right now is a little bit of a sleeping bear, so to speak. They've been experiencing several lockdowns right now, so there's less demand there. But if they kind of shake that off, come out of hibernation, so to speak,
that's even more pressure.
That's even more pressure, exactly, and that could increase prices even faster.
At the same time, there are lots of other countries that are sitting on plenty of oil outside of Russia, right? And when we think about the oil cartel OPEC, which really does dictate prices and production, why can't they just bring out more oil?
So OPEC had a meeting earlier this month, but from reports that we're hearing about it, it was very short, apparently just 15 minutes, and there was no talk of the Russian invasion of Ukraine at all. So when we're thinking about OPEC, really the message from them, even if it's a little bit behind the scenes, seems to be this isn't our problem. They don't view this as a fundamental supply issue that they need to solve. And don't forget, not OPEC, but OPEC plus, the kind of wider group there, that includes Russia. So that could be a big reason that we're not really hearing them address it so far.
They don't want to step on their toes.
Exactly. So they had this meeting earlier this month. They did announce a modest increase in barrels per day production, 432,000, but that's really more in line with their plan to start to unwind their pandemic curbs. It's not really reaching out a helping hand to Europe, so to speak.
It's not in response to the war, we can say.
No.
Okay. All right. DW Business's Cassandra Sant, my colleague, thank you very much. Well, earlier this week, the U.S. revealed its latest inflation figures, which dipped slightly in April. But the overall trend of climbing prices showed little sign of retreat. The annual rate of 8.3% for April is just slightly lower than the month before, which itself represented a decades-long high. And yet, it's the first dip in price growth over the last 8 months. Well, despite that seemingly good news, the high rate of inflation is putting plenty of pressure on average American families, with gasoline prices at record highs this month. U.S. President Biden described inflation as the #1 threat to the U.S. economy, saying his administration is working hard on solutions.
Bottom line is easing these bottlenecks and making our supply chains more secure is a major focus of my economic strategy. So things move more quickly. Prices go down, not up. You know, some parts of my plan I've been able to get done on my own. I mean, just without congressional approval. Some parts are being held up by Congress. But all of my plan is focused on lowering costs for the average family in America, to give them just a little bit of breathing room.
We asked our financial correspondent in New York, James Sweeney, why the U.S. can't just pump more oil to bring prices down. Take a listen to what he said.
Americans everywhere are complaining about rising prices, especially gasoline prices that are pushing Americans already living paycheck to paycheck towards the brink. Now, many may be blaming higher prices on supply chain problems, which makes a lot of sense when everything is more expensive, but it's actually the price of oil that's been driving inflation. Inflation is currently at 8.3% for April, still at a level not seen in more than 4 decades. And when broken down, oil prices are what's accounted for a majority of the increase. The conflict in Ukraine, for starters, doesn't help, as there's a lot more oil demand now that most of Europe is not buying Russian oil, and there's refining issues. Turning crude into oil, well, actually turning crude oil into gasoline and getting it into your local station requires a number of steps, each with its own cost. The refining typically accounts for around 18% of the per gallon price, according to the API, but that percentage can climb quickly. Many refineries are on the Gulf Coast and can be flooded or otherwise damaged during hurricane season and forced offline, which can cause prices to spike. There's also less space to refine that way, by the way. Hurricane season begins in June and runs through November. It's coming up. And do we even need to discuss gasoline prices, which this week alone continues to set records on an almost daily basis? With refining and supply and demand issues and per gallon taxes, these reasons alone are enough to answer why the U.S. just can't pump itself out of trouble.
All right, our financial correspondent, James Sweeney, there. And with me now is Karen Pittel. She's director of Germany's IFO Center for Energy, Climate, and Resources in Munich. Karen, thank you for joining us. What we've been hearing so far, OPEC isn't producing more, the U.S. isn't pumping more, and we're about to see this oil ban go into place over the following 6 months, I'd say. Where is all of this leading us in terms of prices? Can we say that with any certainty?
No, basically we can't. I mean, there's a number of issues, like you said, OPEC, the US, and how much is produced. But then there's also the question, in the remaining time until the embargo, how much can actually Russia also sell elsewhere? Because that frees up other amounts. Now, the estimation is that Russia won't be able to sell everything instead of pipeline via ship. But the more it sells, the less the supply situation escalates and the lower the price increase will be. Also, at the same time, of course, if we are going towards a global recession or at least a dampening of growth, then that would also mean less demand. So it's really hard to say. I think it's fair to assume that prices will be increasing. It's just not sure how much.
Is there a case for oil majors to invest more in drilling at this time to increase production?
That is a very good question. Of course, prices are really high at the moment. At the same time, there's, of course, the threat of climate policy where economies basically pledge all around the globe to lower their use of fossil fuels. So it's a short-term, long-term situation, but my best guess would be that we actually see investment in drilling, in exploration, picking up over the next 1 or 2 years.
The flip side of that, of course, is that countries like Germany allowing expansion of drilling. Could we anticipate that in the months ahead?
You mean for home-produced oil and gas? I'm not so sure. There is a large majority really in favor of climate policy and who is really opposing drilling and producing more at home. So I don't see really Germany investing in this kind of long-term commitment, and especially with respect to gas, because our conventional resources are almost used up and we would have to go into fracking. And there's a lot of distrust and opinion against this type of drilling and exploration in Germany.
I have to ask you, Mario Draghi, Italy's prime minister, threw out this interesting idea this week after meeting with Joe Biden. He said that maybe there should be an OPEC of consumers. That is, a large number of consuming countries, oil-consuming countries, working together to bid prices down. What do you make of that? Is that feasible?
I've heard that a couple of times, basically as a means to cap prices in the oil or in the gas market. I'm a little skeptical with respect to that. There's always, it's kind of a voluntary alliance, and you always face the danger that countries who actually want to have more needed for the industry, want to have more for consumers, actually break out of that type of cartel. But the idea is interesting, and of course it would be something to discuss, especially with respect to the G7, whether there is some ground on which a fundamental agreement can be based that can be trusted.
Finally, I have to ask you, should we anticipate that what we're seeing right now with energy prices, will that change the way that we consume energy for the long term? Or will this be sort of a blip in a longer road?
I mean, with respect to oil prices, it's really hard to say how they develop in the long run. I mean, since I've been dealing with these issues, I've heard they'll never increase again or they'll never fall again. So it's really hard to say how long it's actually going to last, this price spike. On gas markets, the estimation is that it's probably going to be a more long-term increase. So I do think that the higher prices will change the way we use energy household-wise, but also in the industry, investing more in energy efficiency, switching to other types of fuels. But of course, if this price hike is really more of a short-term nature, then what we have seen in the past is that energy savings, fuel savings don't last that long. Many people revert back to their old behavior.
All right, Karen Pittel with IFO's Center for Energy, Climate and Resources in Munich. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that's all for our business special on oil and rising inflation. We've got plenty more business videos elsewhere on our DW News YouTube channel. Do check them out. You can also find out more online at dw.com/business. Thanks for watching.